Thank you, Dr. Huemer. Now let's shift to our next topic. Why believe in the existence of the soul?
Well, so I mean, I think the first thing to get at is, well, why should you be a dualist rather than a physicalist? So the physicalists think that everything is physical, all phenomena, all properties, objects, events, and so on are physical. And the dualist thinks that there's two separate kinds of things, physical things and mental things. So, okay, why should you be a dualist rather than a physicalist? Basically, I think that there are three features of the mind that the physicalists have a hard time explaining. One is qualia, as philosophers call it. Qualia is sort of the qualitative feel of experiences. There's a particular way that it feels to you to have a certain experience. Like there's the smell of a rose, which can't quite be communicated to somebody who hasn't experienced that, right? Okay, so qualitative feel of experiences. Second thing that's hard to explain is intentionality. The fact that our thoughts are about something, they refer to something, etc. Ordinary mere physical objects aren't about anything. So you could say like, oh, well, I have a book and that's a physical object and the book is about something. It's about morality. But what makes it be about morality is something in our minds. It's the fact that we observers can interpret the words and have certain associations with the words in here that make it be about something. Okay, but it's hard to explain where this aboutness comes from, right? So like for other things, it comes from our mind, but then explain how our mind gets to be about things. That's hard to explain in purely physical terms. The third thing about the mind that's hard to explain in physical terms is free will. So if you just have ordinary physical events and like you're just a collection of particles, the particles are moving around in your brain. Um, they could be moving around deterministically or indeterministically, but either way, it's hard to see how you get free will out of that. Right. And then like if it's just the particles moving around, if it's not deterministic, then it seems like it's got to be random. And so then um, either way, it doesn't look like you have free will. Okay, so now obviously all three of these things could be discussed at much greater length. Okay, but that's basically I don't think the physicalists have a good count of these three things, and therefore you should think there's something beyond the merely physical. Okay, and then now there's a issue about whether you should be, as they call it, a property dualist or a substance dualist. Among philosophers, what this means is basically the property dualists think that there is a single object called the person, which has both physical and mental properties. And then the substance dualists think that, um, well, the person is a composite of two distinct entities, the mind and the body. The body has physical properties, but not mental properties. And the mind has mental properties, but not physical properties. Okay. And then the two are interacting with each other, according to there must be some laws of nature that have not yet been discovered, right? Okay. So, why should you believe the substance dualist view rather than the property dualist view? Well, basically, I think that the substance dualist has the only adequate account of personal identity. So, there's this area of philosophy where people talk about the conditions under which a person continues to exist as the same person over time. Okay, so you have questions like, when you in Star Trek, when you step into the transporter and they like disassemble your body and then they beam the energy down to the surface or something like that and then reconstitute your body. Okay, so here's a philosophical question. Is the person who comes out after the transport, the person who gets reassembled on the end, is that the same person as the person who stepped into the transporter? Okay, so that's an example, and there's just like a whole bunch of questions like that about the identity of persons. Okay. So basically, I think the only account of the identity of persons that's consistent with very strong, very widespread intuitions about identity of persons is the soul theory. It's that there's a non-material component that determines the identity of persons, right? Which could be referred to as the soul. So where the soul goes, that's where the person is.
Very interesting. How would you comment on the following statement? Quote, the very fact that you can hit someone on the head with a hammer and change their state of mind says enough against substance
Yeah.
dualism. Leading philosophers of mind raise precisely this objection. End of
Yeah.
quote.
Yeah. This does remind me of Dr. Johnson's refutation of Berkeley, where Johnson kicked a rock, and so, Berkeley thought that there was there was no matter. There's only the mind and ideas in the mind. So like if Samuel Johnson is told about Berkeley's view and says, how would you refute such a view? And then he kicks a rock and he says, I refute it thus. And but that doesn't really work because it could just be that he's having the idea of kicking a rock in his mind. That doesn't really refute Berkeley's view. So anyway, you have to look at what the person's actual view is. Okay. So, are dualist people who think that there's no interaction between the mind and the body? No, no, they are not. Okay. Like, I bet there's no contemporary dualist who thinks that. So, right. Like, I think that's just a straw man. Right. So, um, brain disorders cause mental disorders. So that's true. Like, you know, hopefully you don't have to hit anyone with a hammer. Just but we know that there are cases where people suffered brain damage or whatever, some kind of disorder of the brain, and then it affects their mental capacities. And so what? So the mind and the brain interact with each other, right? Which is what virtually all dualists have been saying anyway. Like they haven't thought that these are completely unconnected things, right? Right. Like put it like this. You know, um, plants on Earth require sunlight in order to grow and survive. And so if you block the sunlight, then the plant will die. Does that show that the sun and plants are not separate entities? Like the sun and plants are actually the same thing? No, it doesn't show that. That's ridiculous, right? So like, yes, like that does show that the survival of plants depends on the sun. It doesn't show that they're the same entity. That's ridiculous. Okay. So your mental functioning is dependent upon the functioning of your brain. That doesn't show that they're the same thing.